mangoes in South Florida benefit from nutrients that are not naturally available in local soils. Of course, there are tons of mango trees that look healthy and produce nice fruit without intervention, but providing additional nutrients can improve the health of your tree and the quality of your fruit. The practice of fertilizing crops using composted manure and vegetation is thousands of years old. In 1842, the first patent was issued for an improved type of fertilizer. Since the early 1900s, nutritional needs of plants have been studied extensively, and many types of fertilizers have been developed and improved. The three main ingredients in most fertilizers are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are considered macronutrients. Typically, fertilizers have three numbers on their labels, which indicate the percentages of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK, in the mix. Nitrogen promotes growth, especially leaf growth. Phosphorus is important to the development of roots, flowers, seeds, and fruit. And potassium is important for the movement of water in plants, and it promotes strong stem growth, flowering, and fruiting. Also important are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, which are considered secondary macronutrients. Additionally, micronutrients are important to long-term plant health and also to fruit production, but are only required in small amounts. These minerals are copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, zinc, boron, and sometimes silicon, cobalt, and vanadium. How quickly these nutrients are available to plants is another consideration. Slow-release fertilizers are more expensive than quick-release fertilizers, but in general, slow-release fertilizers are better for the plants and the environment, and they don't have to be applied as often. So today's topic is fertilizer, and fortunately we have a really good source of information, Har Mahdeem, who not only knows a lot about fertilizer, but also in his business, his tree care business, he applies a lot of fertilizer to different situations. So today he's going to tell us, of all these products that we have, what situation he uses them in and what their strengths are.
It's 8-2-12. 8 is 8% nitrogen. The 2 means 2% phosphate, and the 12 means 12% potassium. And then there's 4% magnesium and a bunch of other ingredients. When you're fertilizing fruit trees, in most cases, you need to make sure that there are many ingredients, not just the first three of the NPK numbers, the nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium numbers. This Helena chemical product also has humic acid, or humate, and it has Tiger 90 sulfur in it as well. So it's very good for acid-forming fertilizer. Most of our tropical fruit trees like acid-forming fertilizers. As I say, it's not one of the cheap ones. You can go some places and find fertilizer for $20 or $25. That's cheaper because it's very fast release, and you have to put out a little bit every 3 or 4 weeks, pretty much year round. This you can put out about twice a year for maintenance, and if the tree looks sickly, you might want to go with 3 or 4 applications a year. but you for sure don't need to be applying it every month. If you recently planted mangoes or any other tropical fruit trees, and they're needing to root in and make a lot of new branches, this is an excellent fertilizer for establishing any kind of fruit tree. If you are growing types of fruit trees that need some nitrogen applied to them every year, well then this would be good for those. With most trees, you need to just notice how the tree is growing. If it is growing too much and not fruiting enough, well then you need to back off the nitrogen fertilizer and use one of the others that we'll talk about here soon. There are many good palm fertilizers on the market. Most any of those are good general use fertilizers for fruit trees. So I know most of you will not readily be able to find this Helena Chemicals product unless you come here where it's retailed at Truly Tropical, or if you have someone who can be qualified as a wholesale buyer to get it. But at Home Depot and other places you can find other 8-12 products which are not quite as good as this one, but still will work well enough for most fruit trees that need nitrogen. This type of fertilizer is for organic production, and most of these have poultry manure or cow manure and leaves and naturally mined substances like powdered rock, such as limestone. An advantage of using at least some of these organic fertilizers, even if you're doing a conventional fertilization program, is that most of these nowadays come with many beneficial microorganisms, beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria that help build a living soil that's a nice environment for plant roots. This bag looks the same as the first one that we talked about, but this one actually is available for organic production. It's a naturally mined substance. It's sulfate of potash magnesia, also known as K-Mag, or sulpomag for short. So that only gives you three things: sulfate from sulfur, and magnesium, and potassium. And that's relatively inexpensive. Another relatively inexpensive fertilizer, often considered a soil amendment, is gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. It's available in many different brands. This one is Kelly's Gypsum, and it does specify that it's a mined mineral. If the bag doesn't say that, it might not be acceptable for organic production, because gypsum is also produced as a byproduct of many commercial processes. And so for most of us that's okay, but if you're trying to be strictly organically certified, you have to use one that's a mined mineral. It makes a huge difference in mango quality. Mangoes growing in poor sandy soil and not getting enough potassium or enough calcium can be lacking in sweetness and other flavor components, and the plants can be weak and disease prone. A well-nourished plant is more resistant to disease. Same as well-nourished people are more resistant to disease. Gypsum has other uses besides plant nutrition. If the soil has too much sodium or other mineral salts in excess, putting calcium sulfate on can remedy the situation. It will tie up those excessive amounts of other things. It will also help you reduce the possibility of burning your plants by putting on too much fertilizer. That's another reason why I usually put out gypsum at the same time I put out a mix of mineral salts, one of these conventional NPK plus minus fertilizers. If I put out gypsum at the same time, in most cases I do not burn the plants with excessive salt. One doesn't always have control of what's going to happen weather-wise, especially if one's putting out a fertilizer that's not completely coated and slow release. If we get 2 or 3 inches of rain suddenly and the fertilizer almost all dissolves but doesn't happen to completely wash away, we can have a high concentration of mineral salts, and that can desiccate and kill hair roots. Of course, some people have high calcium soils, so do not add gypsum. It would make no sense at all to add more calcium to soils that already have too much. And most anyone, after hearing a little bit about it, can look at their soil and see whether or not they have too much calcium. If your soil is full of shell rock or limestone gravel, for sure you have enough or too much calcium. Do not add gypsum. The thing that you will want to add, besides the mixed fertilizer, is sulfur. The sulfur will dissolve some of the calcium that you already have in your soil and turn that into calcium sulfate, gypsum. If your mango tree or other tropical fruit trees are growing too big, you're having to prune and prune and prune, and the trees aren't producing enough fruit, or the fruit is watery and not sweet enough, then you need to stop using nitrogen fertilizer, not only on the tree but on grass anywhere near your tree, and switch to a fertilizer with little or no nitrogen in it. Those mixes are hard to find on the marketplace. I formulated one for the Rare Fruit Council, and now we've updated the formula for our own use in my business, and it's available here at Truly Tropical. This is 0316. Remember that the first number is nitrogen, so 0 means no nitrogen. And to emphasize that, we title it No Nitrogen Fertilizer. For mangoes and large tropical fruit trees. For less growth, more flowering, healthier trees, and more flavor. Small writing. This 0316 is a similar amount of most other ingredients. So it has what your tree needs in iron and manganese, boron, zinc, molybdenum, and of course magnesium.
Well, thanks, Har, for all the information on fertilizers. Right now I'm going to fertilize one of our small trees. This particular tree is fairly established, but I am converting it to a different variety. So this is going to be out of production for about 3 years. And I want to have this new growth. This is what I'm going to graft onto. Of course, I'd like that to grow as quickly as possible so I can get some grafts growing on it. And also, I'd like to provide this tree as many of the nutrients as it needs for long-term health. So I'm going to apply this broad range fertilizer, conventional fertilizer, to this tree. In the rest of the grove, all the fruit-producing trees, we follow organic standards, but this one, as I say, is going to be out of production for a couple of years. So no problem with using the broad spectrum fertilizer. Has lots of micronutrients in it and has some nitrogen to help with the growth. So the standard for how much fertilizer to apply to a tree is 1 pound of a mix, a typical fertilizer, the NPK, per inch of diameter of the trunk. So, in this case, the trunk is about it's about 2.5 inches. So that means 2.5 pounds on this for this tree. And the way that you spread fertilizer is you want to go out to the canopy here. This is the original canopy, and a little beyond. So this looks like about 4 feet out. So I want to go about 6 feet out, and you don't put fertilizer right next to the trunk. The roots that are in the center of this area are for support. And what you want to do is feed the little roots, the feeder roots, very fine, like hairs practically. Those are the roots that are going to absorb the most nutrients. And those are furthest away from the tree. So you want to just sort of scatter it around. In this case, it'll be up to about 6 feet away from the trunk. Now, before we got down here, I took this container, filled it with fertilizer to find out how much 2 pounds would be. And that basically is the same level. This is a 32-ounce container, but it was about the same level that the yogurt was filled to before. Which is right, there's a ridge inside the cup. That's about 2 pounds, and of course that's time release, nitrogen and a lot of other good minerals, so it's not a problem for burning, and this nitrogen and all of the other nutrients will be available over a long period of time. So I will, right now we're in early December, coming out of a cold spell, and I probably won't fertilize this particular tree for another 4 or 5 months. So that was about 2 pounds, and I'll do about a quarter of that. Oops, trying not to show it. So add that other 8 ounces. So that was 2.5 pounds of the fertilizer mix spread around underneath the canopy and beyond of this tree. And one more thing that this tree will need, because we are on the sand ridge that is low in calcium, is some pelletized gypsum. And gypsum, you want to spread about 30% of the weight of the regular fertilizer when you're using the calcium or the gypsum. So we just spread like 56 ounces of fertilizer, and so that's just under 20 ounces of the gypsum. So it's a little more than half of this container. So this is what the pelletized gypsum looks like. And I'll just spread that in the same area that I spread the regular fertilizer. Of course, it's more, you have to spread it more lightly because there's less of it to go around. There we go. So this tree is now set for the next like 5 months. So this is a big old tree, and of course we just recently cut it back. Even though we've eliminated like more than 90% of the canopy, it still has nutritional needs. And I just brought the yardstick just to show you. So basically, if we were fertilizing this in a normal way, it would take an entire 50-pound bag of fertilizer. But there's 2 things going on. Of course, it doesn't have as much canopy to support at the moment, and we want to get a lot of minor nutrients to it that are important at this stage. Of course, nitrogen's good too. We have intentionally put a lot of leaves underneath. The leaves are a source of food, much more food in them than chipped wood, and so it is getting some nutrients now. But I am going to put some K-Mag on, which are, got a lot of those secondary macronutrients in it, and so also some gypsum. So K-Mag is got the potash, the potassium, which is primary macronutrient, magnesium, and sulfur. And in this kind of situation, I'll probably go for about 10% of the recommendation because of the tree being in an unusual state. Of course, it's always good to have these elements available, but you don't want to give the tree more than it needs or more than it can handle. Nothing in this mix will actually burn the roots, but we want to make it available. So basically the same principle is carries forward to this kind of tree as the last one. You want to go to the edge of its canopy, and that means the original canopy before we cut it back, and spread in that general area a little bit further out, and then of course closer to the tree. There's not much reason to go this close to this tree. There's just a lot of huge roots underneath here. You want to go out further where there's finer roots. So we don't have sophisticated fertilizing spreading equipment because we don't use that much. Right now, this tree is going to get the K-Mag and the pelletized gypsum and the leaves that we've already put here, and we'll add some chipped up tree trimmings from a tree company that's going to be here tomorrow. And that should be good for now. We'll come back and revisit this tree in the spring or summer, see if we think it needs anything else. And for the tree down the hill, of course, we had some slow release nitrogen in that fertilizer. That tree's not going to be in production for a couple of years, so we used, it was one of the rare instances that we've used conventional fertilizer in the grove. Just wanted to show you how to do that. And so anyway, I will continue spreading the K-Mag and the gypsum around this tree, and that'll be it for this tree for the next 6 months. If you have a mature mango tree that is in production, you don't need to put nitrogen on it in most circumstances. Also, if your tree has gotten to the size you want it, really don't give it much nitrogen. It's not what you want for good fruit production and also for a manageable tree. So anyway, good luck with your fertilizing.